Welcome to this episode of the Brett and Ethan podcast. Today, we're just going to cover a bunch of the background as to what led up to us filming The Retirement Deception and some of the more interesting, I think, behind the scenes stories that's fairly common. Ethan, is that when we're done with somebody sees the movie, they want to know more. Like, what about these people, and where did you go to film them? How did you find all of these people, and what was it like? And so today's lessons learned from 20,000 miles across the country. I think that's what we're calling this one. And so the genesis of this didn't actually even make it into the movie, which was an article by Michael Finke and David Blanchard called License to Spend. And in fact, we were thinking that was the working title when we started this thing.
Yeah, it was an interesting study where it really went over a group of people where they looked at retirees and they said, okay, two groups. One that had what we call an accumulation strategy going into retirement where they still had their money at risk. It could go up, but it could also go all the way down, versus a portion of retirees that actually, for a bulk or a portion of their assets, they locked it in. And in retirement deception, we call this, which is called the this foundation of bedrock that we talk about, where you can get income that comes in of the highest grade that's guaranteed and potentially can go up. And in the article was really interesting. The findings were that those people in the other camp that put in this bedrock foundation literally could spend double in retirement. And some people don't believe that, but that's, if you look at inflation and everything's going on right now, I think that would be pretty awesome to be able to spend double in retirement than the traditional retiree.
Yeah, and I've done a fair amount of research reading these papers and studying all this. And I was actually recently reading License to Spend, and he talks about the reason why it's not just the the dollars and cents, which when you use the right strategy like income calibration, you can get literally twice as much dollars out of it. But he says the reason why people are they're willing to spend twice as much is because of the emotional security that it gives to them. And so it's not just about, oh, I have the dollars in my bank account. A lot of people have the dollars in their bank account, but they don't spend it because they are afraid they're going to run out. So anyway, we loved that concept. We were like, okay, let's get into this and let's actually go interview people who are getting this guaranteed income and see if in fact this is the case. And so that's what started this whole idea. I mean, obviously we did the movie The Baby Boomer Dilemma with all of the PhDs and Nobel Prize winning economists and all that, and we produced that and put that whole thing together. And then we filmed another one called Social Insecurity about the IRMA problem that's hitting people right now. But this was one that we really wanted to focus in on real life people and what their living experience was if they had this guaranteed income.
Yeah, I think for me, it also spurred on the question is, what is a successful retirement? I hear people talk about this. I've watched multiple videos on it. Many of the PhDs in Baby Boomer Dilemma really discuss that question about what it is. Robert Merton, I think, really is the first article that I read about him, where he discusses it and breaks it down really to two things. And
Mm-hmm.
so, and the other question I've always had when I went into retirement deception when we did it is, can you quantify happiness in retirement? Because you talk about the dollar and cents. There's one side of the coin, which is the emotion. And I did this test with my wife last year, while we were doing the retirement deception, or it was during that time that we were recording it. And I would come home and I would tell her, "Hey, I'm having a really good month at the company, and I'm going to make some good money this month." And then I would watch the credit cards and see what the spending would be. Versus then I would come home and say, "Hey, it's going to be a bad month." And I just did it as a test to see in our own family how do emotions reflect that. And it's interesting. It was just a couple of months that I did it. I told her after the fact, and it wasn't anything, wasn't trying to manipulate her or anything. I just wanted to see emotionally how that impacted our spending. And obviously, the months where I was like, "Hey, it was going to be a good month," we spent more, sometimes
Yeah.
double than we typically would. And the months that I said, "Hey, no," we reduced quite a bit. And that's where I think the emotions come in. So, what is that? What is a successful retirement? And can you quantify happiness, right? I know we have age that happens in retirement. We can have illness and things of that nature. But can you really have a peace of mind or a sense of joy and happiness in retirement and moving into it? And I think that was the main question I wanted to discover as we went to these retirees to see, are they happy? Are there things that they're doing that actually make them not have that worry on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, we've been in this business forever, and I've always kind of felt like, a little detached, I think, from the actual clients, because we've basically done this training financial advisors on these concepts. We pioneered the concept all the way back, probably, I don't know, 10, 12, 15 years ago, called Safe Money Millionaire. We've trained tons of financial advisors on how to use these kind of strategies to help their clients, but we haven't had a lot of individual clients ourselves. And so when we went embarked on this, it was like, I want to go talk to the people and sit in their homes and travel around with them to see what their day to day is like. And you asked the question, can you quantify happiness? And I don't know if you can put a number on it. I don't typically, when we think about quantifying, it's putting a number on something. I don't think you can necessarily put a number on it. But what I did see was the happiest people that I've ever met. And, I was thinking this morning through our journey and where that started. We went to Arizona, we went to Nashville, we went to Dallas, we went to Wall, Texas, we went to St. Louis, we went to Chicago, we went to Michigan, went to Atlanta, went to Miami, went to San Sebastian, went back to Texas. We went all over the place, California, and of course here in Utah as well. And the thing that struck me, and I would always kind of walk away from these interviews really happy, really excited, really kind of almost surprised, was how happy the people are who are retired and they have guaranteed income and they know that they're not going to have to go back to work, and they know they're not going to have to uh, decrease their standard of living due to inflation. And those are not always synonymous, right? You can have a guaranteed income, but you can still be worried about inflation. And one of the people we talked to I asked him, what do you worry about? We tried to ask everybody about that. What do you worry about financially? And the most common answer was they would think about it and they'd say nothing. And that was always striking to me. But one of the interviews, who does have guaranteed income, who's living a pretty darn good life, he said, I'm worried about inflation, and I might end up moving to I think he said maybe Belize or something like that, because he was stuck on a guaranteed income, and that probably wasn't going to go up very much over the next 20 or 30 years. And he's a fairly young guy. I think he's 67, 68, but he had a disability, so he had to retire early. And he's been living it up on the South Beach of, down in Florida, with having a good time, traveling, babes, you name it. He's loving life, but he doesn't know if he can make it last for the next 20, 25 years. And he's not going to be able to, based on what's going on right now.
Yeah, I think for me, the other part of the happiness was people that actually had a plan for retirement to decumulate the assets properly. Otherwise, we talked about this in other podcasts as well as the films, which is most people go into retirement with this accumulation mindset and they keep their assets in accumulation assets like my father did. And that's one of the things that really hurt him. And it's those people that had a plan and they were actually implementing that plan to have that guaranteed income. And if they could actually have it go up, it helped ease a lot of those fears of, hey, if inflation goes up, I mean, you saw David Babel, he's like, well, I just turned on another ray of that income that came in, right? And so
Yeah.
he had a plan. And I think that's the thing where many people that we talked to while we were filming that weren't that happy, or other people that I know that approach retirement don't have a plan. And they go in and these threats of retirement hit them: inflation, a market loss. You don't know how long you're going to live. I think people overestimate longevity, and they may say, oh, well, I'm going to die at
They
81.
overestimate or they underestimate?
Underestimate it. Yeah, thanks for the clarification. And so they underestimate and they may live a lot longer. And those multiple articles that are talking about it now, I'm seeing more and more people around me live longer. And if you retire at 65 or younger and you turn off the bucket of income, and that bucket of money that you have or your nest egg now has to last you for the rest of your life, and you don't have a plan, that's pretty scary.
Well, we actually had an interview with Navy Dowdy, one of the featured experts in the film, and he talked about the statistics showing that a married couple that reached 65 together alive, there's like a, what was it, 75, 80+% chance that one of them would live to like 93 years old. It's something really quite surprising. And it's funny because we reference our own personal stories. Your dad, my dad, they both have an interesting approach to their retirement strategies. Your dad was very much the stock market guy. My dad was very much a real estate guy. And both of them, the evolution of their lives, they've both come around to using annuities now as a piece of their portfolio, where just a couple of years ago that was probably not on their radar screen. And so it's interesting to see as people uh, start to understand what's really important about their retirement. It's not just rate of return, it's not just nest egg. It's how do I make sure that my wife has income? My dad's had some health problems, yours has too. Uh, Probably, if we had to guess, both of our mothers will outlive our fathers. And so, does my mom want to run all these real estate properties and things? Yeah, probably not. She probably would rather just have the money coming in and be able to go do what she wants to do rather than babysit all these tenants and all this stuff. So that evolution has been interesting. But back to the story of longevity, it was not just Navy, but Ken and Lori Deal. Her family history is a similar story where I think it was her maternal mother lived to like 95, maybe even almost 100 years old, and she is struggling because all she has is Social Security. It's like she's got to have the family give her money for food now, uh, and because she's lived so long. Anyway, so that's something I think. I think what was interesting as we talk about lessons learned over these 20,000 miles. That was one of them. It was like this is a real life case study of somebody who actually has this longevity issue, and she's seeing it play out right now, where she's got family members that are in their late 90s and hundreds. And the other part of their story was what I kind of claimed was a failed retirement in the story, because they had this false start. They retired, they stayed retired for 8 months, then she had to go back to work. And I really found the contrast between her story and Muriel so stark, because Muriel worked at the post office at 2:30 in the morning. She had to get up at 2:30 in the morning, and she was going for 15 years. I mean, she worked there for 30, but the first 15 she was a mail carrier, and this lady probably didn't weigh much more than 110 pounds. And she's out there carrying mail in the summer heat of Florida with the dogs chasing her and the rain and the bugs and all this. And so she wanted to transition. So she then went into dispatch. That required her to get up at 2:30 in the morning. Anybody probably listening to this isn't a fan of waking up at 2:30 to go to work. She wasn't either. She put that in, and she told us that before I retired, I wanted to be 100% certain that I would not have to go back to work, because I didn't want to have to get up again at 2:30 in the morning. And so you had Muriel, and not only does she not have to go back to work, they've built a new home, they've got these new cars, they've got a pool. It's like their income and their lifestyle has gone up. And Lori had this false start where they tried to retire, but the money was in the market and variable annuities. They're paying you know a ton in fees, and their money was going down, and they were trying to live off of it. And so that she decided to go back to work. So really interesting dichotomy between the two. Uh, she didn't hate her job like Muriel did, but she'd much rather be home.
Yeah, I sent you over this article on KSL, which this kind of dovetails into what you're talking about, where they talk about this idea of people who are working well past retirement age, and it's just not easy for them. So the article gives a couple of examples of people who went into retirement, like you had mentioned with what we had discovered when we went out there. There are other people across the United States that are retiring, and then because of these retirement threats like inflation that we've talked about, they're having to go back to work. And what's interesting about this article was this idea of what they talked about, agism, where one couple of things. It's they believe according to this article, that people are discriminated against because they're older, even though you're not supposed to discriminate. Secondly, um, the fastest growing, this is according to the Pew Research, the fastest growing group of people in the workforce are 75 years of age, more than quadrupling in size since 1964. So you have this interesting thing going on because of what's going on in terms of people not having the right plan and being able to stay retired. They're now having to come back into the workforce or stay longer into the workforce. And so people are living longer and they're finding to be healthier into their older age. The end of this article is what I found the biggest, which is confronting this ageism, which is, think about this. I retire, and then for whatever reason, I have to go back into the workforce. And so this article talks about the difficulty of that. This one individual says, I started interviewing immediately, but interviewers praised my experience, but I couldn't really find a job, and it took them a long time. And then in another example was a person who moved to Florida. She was a school teacher. She had a pension and some other things, but because of higher healthcare costs and inflation, felt like she had to go back to work. And she ended up getting a job. And it was just really sad when it talked about where she says, now I'm literally scrubbing toilets, making $15 an hour. That's the only thing that she was able to find, which she was able to be kind of a janitor, if you will, at this preschool. And that would be, I think, really tough, where you've had a career, you retire, and then because of not having a plan or whatever reason, now you have to go back and face these issues. And that's going to be really difficult going back. And if you do find a job, then it's something that could have you scrubbing floors. And that would be tough. And I think people who don't really think through that, like, put yourself in your shoes there, like you're 81. There's this person in this article who's actually 80 that went back to work and having to deal with that. When I'm 80, that's the last thing that I want to really have to think about and deal with, because then I have to be confronted with all of these other additional things, like people maybe discriminating because I'm older, not being able to find a job that can actually pay me some good money. And it may be something that's just absolutely, according to what she said, is I just have to swallow my ego every day. I think that's like the biggest thing that I read out of this is like, I go to work and I swallow my ego every day. And that would be tough.
Well, we've seen, I mean, you see it everywhere when you go to the store, when you go to Wendy's and you go to Walmart, you see these folks that are just, struggling to even move around. They're not healthy, but they have to be there because not because they want to. And that's one of the things we heard a lot of when we interviewed people is that if you're happy doing the work that you're doing, take Lyle from Oklahoma, he doesn't ever, he won't retire because he loves what he's doing. He's like mostly retired, but then goes back to work. Then he retires for a couple months and goes back to work. It's another job, and by job, it's a well paying, 3, 4, 5 month type deal, and he's a mediator, so he can go do the work, and then he gets to take off a couple months, and that's great. That's not what we're talking about here. This is a different situation. This is a lot of times people that either cognitively they don't have the sharpness to be running in a high paced Fortune 500 company or whatever because they're just 70 plus. And so what do they get? They get the terrible jobs that you're talking about. In fact, we were in where were we? We were in Florida, and you weren't there, I don't think. I think it was one of those trips that Ken and I were on, and we were actually at a Wendy's or Burger King, but I think it was Wendy's. And we see this little old lady, Hispanic looking lady. She looked like she was 80 plus years old, dragging a garbage can over her shoulder out to the dumpster. And we're driving past. So I jump out and I grab it and I throw it in for her. And she looked like she couldn't even get it in the trash can. And I said, how you doing? And she's like, no, 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 you can't help me. You can't help me. And I was like, well, why not? And she says, my boss, my boss. And she wasn't speaking very good English. Anyway, so I started speaking to her in Spanish. And it's like within minutes, the boss was out there. The manager of the Wendy's location was out there saying, what are you doing talking to our employees? And I was like, what do you mean? They're like, you can't be out here interviewing our people. And I was just like, I was just helping her with the trash and I was talking to her about her job. And she was telling me, get this, Ethan. She was a Cuban immigrant. She was a former university professor for 20 years in Cuba. She had a extremely high education. She had a very good job. And then she came to America because she had family here and she's dragging the trash out, getting bullied by some pink haired, 27-year-old boss manager who doesn't want her talking to some guy who helped her throw the trash in the trash can. That was shocking to me. So as we left, we were leaving, and then we see this manager like really getting after her, almost like, kind of like yelling. So we turn around, we jump the curb. We're driving in this like Ford Expedition or something rental car. We jump the curb, we drive over, we pull up next to the manager, and we're like, "Hey, we just want to make sure that she's not getting in trouble for something because it was not her fault." And they're like, well, no, no, no. We were just telling her that she can't be talking to people out here on the premises without corporate permission. And it was just like, I'm just telling you that it was me who initiated it. I don't want her to be in trouble. And so, anyway, that was the end of that story. But it was kind of this whole microcosm of what you're talking about here, where you take somebody who was formerly a very well to do professional and now she's dumping trashes at Wendy's getting yelled at by some idiot manager.
Yeah, and the other telling thing about this article is people who went back and had to apply for jobs. Multiple people said I was applying for things that I was 100% qualified for, but I couldn't get it because of this idea of ageism. Right? You can't discriminate, but there's a lot of cases out there that they feel like, yeah, people are discriminating against older workers, not wanting to hire them, wanting to go a little bit younger, etc. So, you have that on top where you may have had a 40-year career and you may be an expert at one thing. If you go back to the workforce 10 years later, even though you may be highly qualified or 100% qualified, like multiple people in this article, you may not get it. And then you're back to scrubbing floors. And that's really sad. I mean, that's one of the main reasons we wanted to get this film out there is, so you may say, hey, well, some of these situations can't be avoided. That may not be the case, but what is a true fact is if you start planning, or if you have a plan, you have a higher likelihood of avoiding that situation. So you actually can have a successful retirement and optimizing it correctly.
Well, we've been talking about this idea of quantifying happiness. The dictionary definition of happiness is good fortune, pleasure, contentment, joy, the quality or state of being happy. Okay. So the state of being happy is contentment and joy and good fortune. Okay. So what's the opposite of that? Well, the opposite of contentment is probably discontentment, not being happy, not and just being disgruntled, right? Um, the opposite of joy is probably anger or sadness, and so when you look at how, okay, what does life have to look like for us to be happy? Well, we need to be able to have peace. We need to be able to be content, and that lack of peace or the lack of certainty contributes to a feeling of being unhappy in retirement. And that's what you want to avoid, right? You can say, can money buy happiness? Yes, it can, because it can buy a lifestyle. And if you can have the lifestyle that makes you feel good fortune and joy and contentment, then absolutely the lifestyle lock, the number that's going to lock in that lifestyle for you to live the way that you're living right now for the rest of your life, that's the happiness quotient. That's the number that you need. And we call it that lifestyle lock. So it's an interesting way to think about, okay, well, what is, and Merton in Baby Boomer Dilemma talks a lot about this. He says basically your lifestyle is what you need to be shooting for in order to be happy. And that's what we've seen in all of these interviews is that most of these people are not flying on private jets. We've got the one guy with his own private plane, but for the most part, they're driving everyday normal cars. They're living in fairly normal houses, but they're super happy and they're very, very at peace.
Yeah, I think it's the other thing that I've seen in my life, as well as those that we actually interviewed, which is having that peace of mind. Let's say you have unhappiness in my physical state, right? Maybe I need to become healthier. Well, if I can take the worry off the table of the money, now I have time, right? And time allows me to go and potentially fix that problem. I get that there are some things that are unfixable, but there are many things that are, right? If it's just eating healthier or going back to the gym or having time to go do some of the things that you love that can provide you some happiness in life, right? And I think that's what part of the happiness that I see. If you look at Nancy and she's just dancing all, at the end, she talks
6 days a week, she's dancing, man.
she talks about it's effortless. So the income's effortless, but I also think if you look at the lifestyle piece, that becomes more effortless as well. And
Well,
that's
let's
what to
pick
me drives the happiness.
Yeah, for sure. Let's pick that up on the next episode because there's a bunch of more of these kind of little anecdotes, stories that go right along with that, which is like, what does life look like for these people? We obviously we couldn't put that whole thing in the movie. And so in the next episode, we'll get into describing a little bit more behind the scenes of what life's like for these retirees who have effortless income.